more to pay the bills. Newsrooms everywhere are navigating a shifting landscape. Where tech moves fast, users change their behavior and traditional models no longer hold. From digital innovation to startup experiments, from bold partnerships to new revenue streams. The race is on to find what works and will endure. Breaking barriers, building bridges. Truth needs a business model, but who pays to tell it? Together we see. Let's dive into the discussion. Newsroom business models and how to make them sustainable.
My name is Javier Arguedas. I'm a journalist and news anchor at DW's programs from Latin America, and I'm very honored to be here with you today, and especially honored to welcome our guests for today. We're going to start with a keynote speech, actually. We're going to twist things up a little bit for this panel, by someone who doesn't really need an introduction, especially if you have been to the Global Media Forum before. He is a senior research associate at the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and the lead author for the annual Digital News Report, which many of you know, and it is the largest ongoing global study of news consumption and provides invaluable insights to where our industry is heading. He has also vast editorial experience as one of the founders of the BBC News website, and he was also the head of product and technology for BBC News. Without further ado, please welcome Nick Newman. Hey, Nick. Welcome. The stage is yours.
Thanks very much. The Reuters Institute, for those of you who are not aware, is part of Oxford University, and our mission is to bridge academia and industry. And one of the ways we do this is through our research, and I'm really happy to be back here at the Global Media Forum to share some of the findings from our 2025 Digital News Report. So, as Javier has already mentioned, this is the largest ongoing study of news consumption covering 48 different countries. In terms of the methodology, we use an online survey of around 2,000 people in each market. So, in total, 100,000 people around the world, and the poll was done at the start of this year. The report, as you can see, is supported by multiple partners, including the Google News Initiative. We have broadcasters like the BBC, we have regulators, we have academic institutions as well. So a key theme of this year's report is evidence that traditional media is losing reach, it's losing influence to an alternative ecosystem that includes YouTubers and podcasters and Substackers. And this has been particularly evident in the United States. So this chart shows weekly reach for some of the main sources of news over time. And you can see how television, how print and online news websites are all trending downwards, despite the fact our poll took place at the time of the Trump inauguration. At the same time, we can see an increase in the use of social and video networks as a source of news in the last year. So in the US, overtaking television for the first time. So last time round, when Trump was elected, you can see that all forms of media benefited. But this time round, the surge has mainly been just with those social and video networks. And then on top of that, we see now that news podcasts are ahead of radio in terms of reach in the United States, and also we see the emerging use of AI chatbots, 7% for news. I should add that we only added news podcasts and AI to the question this year, so we don't have historical data yet. And then linked to these trends, we can also measure name recognition for a number of personalities who distribute their content not via television anymore, but exclusively via these online platforms. So in our survey, almost a fifth of our sample in the US said they saw Joe Rogan discussing or commenting on news in the previous week. And if we look at his audience, we can see that it's disproportionately made up of young men, which is why, of course, Trump lent into being interviewed by him. This is the same audience that traditional media is increasingly struggling to reach. So obviously, a big question is this just an American phenomenon, or is it happening in other parts of the world? And you won't be surprised to hear that broadly we see similar trends everywhere, but definitely with a bigger impact in some countries. So this chart shows the proportion in selected countries that say social media and video networks are their main source of news over time. And we see the United States joining a set of countries, including Brazil, India, Indonesia, the Philippines, where trends around influencers and alternative media have been evident for some time. On the other hand, we do see a slightly different picture in many of the Northern European countries, also in Japan, where social media tends to be used less for news, and traditional media brands still have a stronger and more important role. But what do we mean when we talk about social media in the context of news? So this chart shows the different networks that are used for news across 12 countries we've been tracking since 2014. And what you're really seeing here is a picture of increasing fragmentation. So if you look to the left of the chart, a decade ago, social media is really about Facebook primarily. And now, on the right-hand side, we see people using many more networks, often in combination. So Facebook has become less important. Video networks like YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, this is really where we're seeing the growth. And as was mentioned in the previous panel, these networks are less about what your friends are doing. It's now much more about the popularity of the content itself and the virality of that content. So this makes it much harder for publishers to get traffic from these networks than it used to be, affecting the business models that we're going to discuss in a minute on the panel. And then the use of video networks such as YouTube is really exploding in many countries around the world, particularly global majority countries. 55% said they use YouTube for news in India and in Thailand in a previous week. Very high usage in Africa, much of Latin America too. And this is the same chart for TikTok, very significant proportion, much more focused on younger demographics. So the numbers are even bigger with younger demographics. And one of the consequences of these changing consumption habits is that we're also seeing the emergence of news creators, influencers, YouTubers, not just in the US, but in many parts of the world too. And it's striking on this chart, of course, how so many of them are men, using that same extended chat format that Joe Rogan uses in the US. But it's important to note that in countries like India, many of these creators are able to offer perspectives that are more critical of the government than traditional media, which is often seen as too close to the government. And also in a country like Thailand, online influencers are definitely extending the range of debate that previously would have been possible in quite a controlled media environment. It's also important to say that these trends are not just about partisan politics, they're also driving a huge amount of creativity in terms of formats and storytelling, and they're giving opportunities for new voices. So this is Hugo Travers, who goes under the name Hugo Decrypt, and he's a young news creator who reaches about a fifth of under 35s in France each week. And that, of course, has enabled him to get access to presidents, such as President Zelensky, who was invited to the Elysee recently and called on to put a question directly to President Trump. So our report, again, finds huge concern about misinformation. Around 6 in 10 say they worry about being able to tell what is true and false on the internet. So that's higher in Africa, in the United States, and in Latin America. But this year we wanted to get a sense of where people check if they suspect something might be false. Where do they go? It's important to say that what people say in surveys may not be what they do in practice. But what we find here is a clear hierarchy of intent. So news sources that people trust at the top, along with official sources. And this is true for young people, it's true for old people. So there's something still about reputation and heritage that remains important, even if people don't access those sources as often as they once did. We do see some interesting differences by age, though. So younger users, you can see here, more likely to say they would go to social media to check and also use the comments from other users. This idea of peer-to-peer trust, and also more likely to use an AI chatbot. So moving on to AI, and I've touched on this already. This is hard to ask about in surveys, because sometimes consumers aren't aware that answers in Google overviews, for example, are generated by AI. But overall, 7% across markets say they've used a chatbot to access some kind of news. And this figure is twice as high with younger people. As we discussed last year, people in most countries remain deeply uncomfortable with the use of AI in situations where AI is creating the content itself. even if there are some human checks. So that's all the red bars you see there, people uncomfortable and wary about it. But they're broadly more accepting of the idea that AI can assist journalism for research, for helping with investigations, things like that, in a supportive role, as long as humans remain in the loop. And in terms of what lies behind these levels of discomfort, we asked respondents this year how they felt AI would change the news. And across countries, people feel it will make it cheaper to make, so more abundant. It will make it more up to date, but at the same time, less transparent, less accurate, and less trustworthy. So potentially, there's an opportunity here for news organizations to emphasize those elements which we know are super important for audiences. So a huge question, finally, which we're going to discuss in the panel in a moment, is how the news industry survives these changes to platforms, these changes in social networks, and the impact of AI. What will this do to business models? And of course, many publishers have been leaning into different kinds of reader engagement, subscription, or membership. So what do we find in our data? So this chart shows the proportion that say they have paid for any kind of online news in the last year, and we see quite a lot of variation. So in some Northern European countries, significant proportions paying directly, but in some other bigger European countries like the United Kingdom, here in Germany, just 1 in 10, so 90% are not prepared to pay directly for news, even in countries like Germany. This year, we explored new approaches to reader payment, including the appetite for bundling. On the left, you can see multiple publications, so that sort of Apple News Plus model for a single reasonable price. Or you have the New York Times, that are combining different kinds of lifestyle games, cooking with news, and sort of cross-subsidizing them. So some people might be interested in that kind of bundle. Or micropayments, which have been tried in parts of Africa and Asia as well. So again, the Washington Post is experimenting with that. So in total in Germany, about 19% of non-payers say they might be interested in one of these options, but the vast majority say they would not be interested in any of these options. So some real challenges which we can discuss in a moment. So just a reminder of some of the key takeaways, that loss of influence and the implications for that in terms of attention and business models. Video and audio doesn't necessarily come naturally to many news organizations, so how do we lean into that? Are there new models for making money from audio video? What about AI chatbots? What's that going to do to the access model? What's the new layer of monetization that might sit on top of it? And then finally, as news subscriptions sort of reach a level, how do we drive further growth and deeper connection with audiences? So I will leave it there and look forward to the next discussion. All of our data is available for free from our website, and I would encourage you to experience it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Luke. I'm going to invite you to sit to what would be my left, this right here. Correct, and thank you again for those insights, and we of course understand why that report is such a reference in our industry. We're going to dig deeper, of course, into our subject, and let's now call up the rest of our participants for today's panel. First up is the co-founder and CEO of Check My Ads, which is the digital advertising watchdog. She is a trusted advisor to Fortune 500 brands, government officials, and industry leaders to build new sustainable standards in the all-deciding digital advertising. Welcome, Claire Atkin. And my next guest has an impressive resume with a veteran newsroom management experience with more than 2 decades at the Associated Press. And today, she oversees partnerships and digital transformation and AI projects at Microsoft. Please welcome Noreen Gillespie. Just at the left of Claire. And last but not least is an Indonesian senior journalist whose experiences span from production to business development and policy making. He served as a member of parliament who amended the ITE law, which governs digital communication, online behavior, and electronic transactions in Indonesia. And he is the current president director of Metro TV, one of Indonesia's leading news broadcasters, and of course also a DW partner. Please welcome Arief Suditomo. Welcome. Welcome, and thank you for being with us today for this all crucial subject for so many newsmakers, journalists, but also media professionals that are certainly facing hard times. I'm going to start with the very basics here because we have a title to our panel and it's called Newsroom Business Models and How to Make Them Sustainable. So I'd like to start with you, Claire. What does it mean to have a sustainable newsroom business model in 2025?
Thank you so much for the question. Thank you for having me. It's so wonderful to see friends in the audience. My name is Claire Atkin, and I run Check My Ads. We are the ad tech watchdog, and we exist to get you paid. We believe that a sustainable business model includes digital advertising, and it includes advertising in general. And by not prioritizing digital advertising, the news industry is leaving about $100 billion on the table globally. There are so many things that I want to tell you today, and the number one thing is that you really have to pay attention to the digital advertising ecosystem. There are criminals taking away money from you, and you can get it back.
All right, we'll certainly hear more about that. I'm going to ask the same question to the rest of the panel. So Noreen, what does it mean to have a sustainable business model?
You know, I think whether you're looking at a global or national brand or whether you're looking at a local news organization, there's different types of economic challenges that those groups face. But the challenge is really the same. How are we going to build businesses that last for another generation? We've heard a lot of different discussions over the panels at this particular event over the consequence of not having that information available to communities. And so I think what this moment in the world, what this moment in technology gives us is the opportunity to think really boldly and freely about what we can change in terms of business. And we'll get into some of these examples later. AI does offer us the opportunity to take a look at our systems, take a look at our workflows, take a look at what we're spending human and technological resources on, and begin to think about some of those changes.
I'm going to ask Arief, because you, of course, also need to have a sustainable model, clearly. What does it mean for you?
For me, the meaning of sustainability is when we can guarantee our being relevancy, when we can guarantee that we can continue our production process, when we can guarantee that the welfare of our staff can be maintained, and when we can guarantee that our dedication to our audience can still be served. That's just, the thing that sustainability for me.
And last but not least, Nick.
I think many media are just struggling with the old business models, which are obviously over time going to become less important. And so the challenge is, how do you lean into new forms of monetization, many of which are not even built yet. So particularly around AI, we don't know how that's going to work, but also around some of the trends I was talking about in terms of audio, video. In many cases, all of that is being mediated through platforms. So the growing power of platforms is a major struggle in building out those new business models. And so we're going to need to work sustainably with the whole ecosystem, with the advertisers, with the platforms, to build something that really serves society and gives us what we need, which is reliable, independent journalism.
Let's try and see how we can get there. Noreen, you work with several media organizations of all sizes. What is the main concern that you hear, and how do you address it?
I think there's a lot of them. I think one of the things that we are trying to tackle in our work are adoption gaps around AI. And I think we heard a little bit from Nick this morning about audience trust, and I think that is one of the main hurdles for journalism organizations to grapple with, because the product that journalists put into the world is inherently based on trust. So any product that cannot convey that trust is a risk, right? So adoption gaps exist geographically. They exist by format in news organizations, and they also exist, I think, between large organizations and very small organizations. One of the interesting trends that we're starting to see is that innovation can exist across all of those different groups. It can happen as a result of concentrated resource and a decision to lean into this technology, or if you're a small local organization, it can happen out of necessity. And so as we've worked with organizations, we've discovered that adoption is about a couple of things. It's not just about technical expertise, it's about willingness, it's about cultural attributes within the newsroom, and it's also financial. I think, how do we create tools that are able to be used by the news industry that are affordable, accessible, and trustworthy? And so those are some of the issues that we start to tackle at the beginning of a conversation that starts with, how do I begin to implement AI?
Claire, you mentioned a lot of opportunities there. What, in your perspective, are the opportunities that lie ahead as opposed to the challenges?
Advertising accounts for about $1 trillion globally. Okay, $1 trillion is 1,000 billion. And the newsrooms of the world have had about a 50% loss of advertising over the past decade. Advertisers want to be on what they call quality publishers. They want to be associated with trusted publisher brands. So why are our journalism friends losing their jobs around the world? I mean, $1 trillion, that should cover a lot of salaries. The answer is that the media economy, the system of digital advertising that controls all of digital media, I'm talking about ads, which give relevance to all kinds of publishers, even the ones that don't deserve it, money, $1 trillion, and data, are the people who make and break whether a publisher lives or dies. Now, there are 3 parties of value in a media economy. Of course, you have the publisher who is creating the news, creating, dare I say, content. And then you have the reader, the citizen, the consumer, if you're a marketer. And you have the advertiser. And in this natural media economy, these are the parties that provide value. Well, what has happened is that social media companies have intermediated between the, let's call them users now, the readers, and the news. So they're filtering what the kind of news that people might see are with algorithms and news feeds. And then there's also the monetization side, which is the intermediation of publishers and advertisers. And that intermediation is mostly Google Ads. Okay? Google Ads, about 80% of the GDP of digital advertising runs through Google Ads, which, by the way, is an illegal monopoly, according to the US government, the US justice system, as of this year. And about 1,000 other digital advertising technology companies. These are people who bring the advertisers to market, people who bring the publishers to market, and the folks who run the real-time bidding sort of negotiation auction in the middle. And these folks are intermediating the business model of digital advertising so that advertisers no longer place ads themselves on the internet, they no longer have control over where ads go, and they can no longer see where the ads have been. So we need to advocate for these 3 parties. We need to advocate for, of course, news publishers. We also need to advocate for users. We need privacy rights to undermine the tracking and data gathering that this industry says is valuable. It is not. It is only valuable for them and for propagandists. And we need to advocate, and this is where I really want to stress, for advertisers' rights to have control over where their ads go. They want to be with you. So let's help them get there.
Arief, as Metro TV goes digital first, do you recognize that issue? Do you recognize that you don't really have that much control about where your digital advertising comes from, goes, that it's just with intermediates?
Yes, I do believe that we have similar situation back home in Indonesia, because I just got this data from GroupX, a multinational advertising agency in Indonesia, that they are forecasting that in 2025, around 75% of the total ad spend will be dominated by the programmatic advertising, which is represented by those global digital platforms, as well as those small portion of digital ad advertising industry from the local publishers. So this leaves us with a very small portion of budget, advertising budget. And Group M was just projected that it's only around 16% that left for the mainstream media, especially television. So meanwhile, when you see the traffic in Google or in those global platforms, they are using our content. So in this situation, we're now trying to discuss it with the legislators, with the lawmakers at home, that we are supposed to have this intervention by the government, unless there's nothing will be left for us. Well, you know, some TikTokers, YouTubers, or those content makers are doing very great, very well, doing those monetization with programmatic ads. Well, Metro TV, we have around 600 employees nationwide, and we have to cover lots of production costs. We have to cover overhead costs and many things that cannot be, it's not burdening those content makers. And the fact, my last argument is the fact that those global digital platforms are not contributing any tax to the country is something that's very concerning for me. That is the thing that becomes my concern, especially that includes the situation of ad spend in Indonesia.
When we hear all of this, Nick, it's inevitable to have a sense of powerlessness. You feel like you're exposed to these, big companies, to these industries, especially if you're a small outlet or an independent journalist. Is there an alternative? Is there another way of making ends meet?
I think the future is definitely going to be about advertising, but not just advertising, right? It's also about some of these new models of direct reader payment, and we're certainly seeing that in some of and diversification in different ways as well. So, I think most media companies are really looking at sort of 3, 4, 5 income streams, which would include, I think in the future, licensing is going to become much more important when we talk about artificial intelligence. We're starting to see deals being done. But I think the challenge is that a few big media companies, upmarket media companies that have something that's really valuable to people who are prepared to pay, those are doing really well. So you see New York Times, Le Monde, the big news organizations, employing more people, being very successful. And then at the other end, you've got sort of individual creators with very low cost bases that are also able to build a lot of value for a particular group of people. The media companies in the middle that don't have something that's distinctive or unique going forwards are going to be in real trouble. So that's the challenge. How do we get reliable news to people who aren't prepared to pay? How do we find the right mix? And how do we do that in a way that produces journalism that is truly valuable and independent to large groups of people as well as just to niches?
You mentioned licensing as a potential income source in the future. Noreen, we've heard that, of course, as an idea many times, but we've also heard critical voices of deals being made, especially with big tech companies, when it comes to licensing the content or allowing for these platforms to have access to the content that the journalists create. What's your take on that, and how do you address that concern with companies or with newsmakers?
Look, I think that every issue that we're talking about here is going to require a multi-stakeholder approach, right? It requires the tech companies to be at the table, it requires regulators to be at the table, and it requires the journalists and news organizations to be at the table too, right? So there's not one particular policy that's going to solve the economic challenges of the journalism industry, right? But I think that there's different strategies that you can employ from all of those groups. I want to go back to the last question just for a second, because I think there's an important bit of context that I want to add there. In terms of advertising, I think we are sitting on an opportunity for every single organization to understand their audience better than they ever have before, right? We now have the capability to take all of these dispersed data sets about what people are consuming, how they're consuming it, when they're consuming it, if they're a subscriber, if they've been a subscriber in the past, and put that into one universal system that allows us to better engage with the group that we have, right? That's an opportunity for advertising. We're currently working with a group of local news organizations in the United States on a variety of AI transformation projects. One of those organizations has been tackling advertising, and they've been creating prospecting agents that have allowed them to reach out to more advertisers, different advertisers than they've ever been able to reach out to before by using those types of insights. They deployed it 2 weeks ago, and they had already landed new advertisers a day and a half after deploying it. So I think, going back to what we were talking about before, there are systemic opportunities here that we can be leveraging with the new tools that we have at our disposal.
Just to be clear, would that be a direct contact with advertisers? So in that particular case?
Yes, they're reaching out directly.
Okay, because that would be essentially bypassing, Claire agrees, that would be bypassing the rather traditional platforms that most of us will have from the get-go, right? So do you think that's one of the solutions, to just simply try and go directly to advertisers and bypass the current system?
I do, yes. Go directly, build up your sales team. The one that you dismantled 15 years ago because digital advertising promised automatic revenue. The sales teams understand advertisers, they understand the audience, and they can sell to these major advertisers, local advertisers of all sizes. The intermediation that I'm talking about is not one company. It's often 4 to 7 companies along the way. Yeah, and we have it looks a lot like a financial market, okay? We have companies bringing publishers to market, companies bringing advertisers to market, and the unit of commerce that is being sold on this marketplace is not ads, it is ad space. Okay, so the publisher, the news publisher, is coming to market with bundles of ad space for the advertiser to fill with their ads, okay? And it's just like stock markets. It's just like, you remember the subprime mortgage crisis before 2008? It looks a lot like that because this ad commodity is being bundled and rebundled by this series of middlemen so that it looks increasingly attractive to advertisers. Well, if it looks like a financial market, it doesn't have any of the regulation of a financial market. Okay. I don't know if you all remember Enron. Enron happened, 20 years ago? There was massive fraud in the financial market. We used a duty of care law to say, no, you don't have just duty to your shareholders, you also have duty to your clients. We need that for advertisers. We also don't have KYC, know your customer law. So if you're a car dealer, you have a KYC duty to get a hold of the social security number of the person who's buying the car. That's because the car industry used to be rife with organized crime. Well, this industry, according to the World Federation of Advertisers, is the second largest industry in the world for organized crime because of the level of fraud and money laundering. That $100 billion that I'm talking about belongs to you, but instead it's going to these middlemen. The third thing and final thing is that we need transparency for advertisers. So advertisers, when they're running a campaign, we want hourly log level data, the details, so that we can find fraud. Finally, of course, antitrust, anti-monopoly regulation is required, and we need you all to back these policies, because if advertisers have more control, they will be more inclined to pull advertising in-house, stop relying on these middlemen, and to pick up the phone and actually call the local news outlets for direct advertising.
I would briefly like to include the audience. We also have an interactive question for you. You know the procedure by now, I hope. There will be a QR code showing up, and the question that we would like to ask you is, what brings more success today, following metrics or pursuing an editorial agenda? Because that's a little bit the two dimensions that we're having here. Briefly, before we head into the content aspect, which is very important, Arief, we talked about subscription models. We've been having these two dimensions in this discussion. One is how to deal with better advertising, how to optimize it. The other one is what can we offer for people who are willing to pay. What's your experience so far with subscription models, and what would be your advice?
Yes, I saw Nick's presentation, And I'm sure that the Indonesian is part of the below 80%. And we don't like to pay for our news. That is the thing. So we have already tried to create some subscription in our news portals, but it fails. So what we are doing right now at the office is we try to find several business models that is actually a bit far from the editorial process. It still have anything to do, it's a connection with editorials, but first we do this, activation. We offer clients who wants to promote their brands off-air. We create exhibition, we create seminar, we create online seminar, and sometimes we broadcast it. So that is one thing that we invent to back up to support our revenue. And the other thing is we also create talent management, because in Metro TV we have so many, at least 30 newsreaders who have big followers. So we offer them to be part of the campaign of some brands or some mission of some institutions, but we have to be carefully select what kind of mission that they are having. Mm-hmm. And we also have this business of awards. So we give awards twice a year in celebrating women empowerment, and also some those champions in small and medium businesses, and some awards for environmental issues. And we just found out that there are so many brands, so many institutions that wants to be associated with these winners. And that's the thing that we do this every year. And the last thing is we do have a very tough challenge that we try to adjust a bit of our editorials. So I have this idea that why don't we open our editorials? Why don't we include some of other people's mission to be part of our editorials, and they can be it can be our part of new revenue streams. But again, I face a great challenge internally, because there will be so many discussions, so many challenges about how the integrity of these methods. We selectively do this, like the idea of there is, the circular economy, the green lifestyle. Yes, yes. There is a producers of a mineral water, a bottled mineral water, and they want to give a campaign about how responsible that the company is trying to do with their plastic waste, and we create a joint campaign, and we put them as part of our editorials. Okay. So that is the thing that eventually provide us a very significant support to our traditional revenue streams. Thank you.
I want to briefly show you the results that we have in our little poll. 30% of you consider it's following metrics what will bring the most success. 69% of you think that pursuing an editorial agenda is the most important thing, which is interesting because we put so much effort into understanding the metrics and following them. Noreen, would you agree with that assessment, that the agenda is the most important thing?
I can see the intent behind both of the answers. I don't think you can separate them. I really don't. I think that they are interdependent, right? So you can pursue the news that you know that you need to pursue for your community, for your audience. You do also have to be driven by the performance of that reporting, right? And I think ignoring that sets yourself up for more risk, right? We have to be here. News organizations have to be here to serve their communities, and completely ignoring metrics sets up a situation where there's the risk.
The answer is to stick to what audiences want, which is providing real value, something of distinctive value to audiences. And that should be your starting point. And then there will be a whole range of business models that come off that. You know, you've just been talking about a huge range of things. So it's not just, you know, traditional advertising or programmatic advertising. There's all kinds of sponsored content. There's licensing income I talked about before. We really need to think about business models of the future that are digital, but are also journalist friendly. You know, that are not benefiting, you know, huge platforms necessarily. And so that means we do need to get closer to audiences, we need to get closer to communities, and we need to really invest in business models that haven't yet been invented as well.
I have time for one question from the audience. If there is anyone that would like to pose a question to one of our panelists, because I have to watch the time. If anyone would like to ask one? We have one here. Please be as brief as you can, and that also applies to the to the response. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question of whether any of the recommendations that you've been sharing could apply to exiled media, and whether the research by Reuters about social media platforms, particularly Facebook, also considered the platform accountability or lack of for the reasons for journalists to use it less and for the audience to use it less. Thank you.
I think that goes to Nick Newman, I'm assuming?
Sorry,
Yeah.
I missed the first bit.
The first bit is to any of you, whether any of the recommendations that you shared could also be used by exiled media outlets.
Exiled?
Yes.
Right.
Exiled media outlets from who cannot work in their countries because of censorship, for example.
I mean, I would say that, you know, one of the ways in which exiled media is to tap into money and support. So donation money, people who believe in the same cause of providing, you know, quality information. Yeah, a number of, I'm just thinking of something like the Kiev Independent. I know it's not an exiled organization, but they are tapping into a global community to help fund journalism within Ukraine, so that you could think about it the other way around too.
All right, unfortunately, that's all that we have time for today. I would first like to have a big round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so much for your insights. The quick takeaways for you, of course, is to rethink how you can reach the audience, the particular audience that could be willing to pay, to rethink the way in which you are dealing with your advertising, and maybe become more independent by reaching directly to the advertisers, and of course also watch the legislation and organize in order to have more transparency in the advertising field. That's all from me, but I will first release you to your lunch break with some organizational informations for you. We will now have a networking and lunch break until 2:15 p.m. At 1:30 p.m., you can join our juggler and take part in a fun, interactive performance. And then we will lead into the breakout sessions at 12:15 p.m. in all three venues. You have two possibilities to have lunch like yesterday, one at the Bundeskunsthalle restaurant where we are, and the other in the tent outside the museum courtyard. Thank you so much for your attention. Enjoy your break and see you next time. Goodbye.